The past has a way of tricking us. We look back at the movies that frightened us in childhood or unsettled us in our teenage years and think we remember them clearly. But memory is not a recording, it's a negotiation. It keeps what feels safe, blurs what feels threatening, and quietly discards whatever would disturb us if we dared to look at it too long. Some horror films survive only in this rewritten state. People swear they were light, silly, clumsy, even unintentionally funny. They remember the posters, the taglines, the fashion, the odd scenes that became cult jokes. Yet when these films are revisited, the floor shifts beneath them, the humor evaporates, the nostalgia cracks, and the truth, once softened by time, re-emerges with a sharpness that feels almost personal. Tonight, we're not exploring lost films or cursed productions. We're exploring the movies your memory edited. These are the stories that audiences collectively misremember, not because the films were unclear, but because the emotions they stirred were too heavy to keep intact. Trauma disguised as camp, cruelty dismissed as quirkiness, despair repackaged as entertainment. What was once unsettling becomes fun, only when distance dulls the pain. But distance can't last forever. So, as we bring these titles back into focus, prepare yourself for the versions you were never meant to forget, only forced to reshape. Because once you see these films as they truly were, you'll realize the most disturbing horror doesn't happen on screen. It happens in your memory. Fact 1. The Children 1980. The Children is often reduced in memory to an oddball B-movie. Radioactive fog, painted nails, murderous kids, something too strange to take seriously. But watching it again transforms that memory into something far more unsettling. Beneath the pulp premise lies a quiet, eerie tragedy that time has tried to bury. The children, remembered as silly or exaggerated, become unnervingly haunting. Their stillness, their expressionless faces, the way they approach adults with slow, deliberate calm, each moment feels like a violation of something primal, innocence, weaponized, affection inverted, parenthood turned into a trap. The adults, often dismissed as caricatures, reveal a far more painful dynamic upon rewatch. They are terrified not of monsters, but of the impossible choice before them: confront what their children have become, or let love blind them into fatal hesitation. The rural setting, open fields, empty roads, quiet houses, deepens the dread. Isolation stretches in every direction, making every encounter feel unavoidable, intimate, and doomed. Memory turned the film's absurdity into its defining trait. But beneath the fog lies a story that was never funny at all, only heartbreaking. Fact 2. The Stepfather 1987. In collective recall, The Stepfather often resembles a tidy thriller, a charming man hiding monstrous intentions, a suburban family slowly uncovering the danger living among them. But that simplified version masks what the film truly explores: the terrifying fragility of identity when it's built entirely on lies. The stepfather, remembered as a charismatic psychopath, becomes something colder and more disquieting upon rewatch. His persona is not just a mask, it is a role he forces the world to play along with. Every gesture feels rehearsed, every word measured, every smile part of a script he cannot deviate from. The moment reality contradicts his fantasy, the mask twitches, and the cracks begin to spread. The suburb around him, once recalled as warm and idyllic, reveals itself as complicit, a neighborhood so obsessed with appearances that it never questions the man standing in plain sight. And when the violence surfaces, it is not chaotic, but eerily methodical, as though he is simply discarding a story that no longer fits. The horror of The Stepfather is not that he kills, it's that he believes he is restoring order. Fact 3. The New Kids 1985. Many viewers look back on The New Kids as a loud, rebellious slice of 80 seconds chaos, teenagers versus bullies, a bit wild, a bit exaggerated, ultimately just another youth in jeopardy thriller. But that memory is a simplification born from distance. When revisited, the film sheds its supposed bravado and reveals a far more disturbing truth. This is a story about cruelty escalating unchecked in a place where no one steps in to stop it. The siblings at the center, often remembered as plucky newcomers, appear far more vulnerable the second time around. They are grieving, disoriented, and desperate to fit into a town that greets them not with curiosity, but with predatory fascination. The bullies, flattened in memory into over-the-top delinquents, are genuinely dangerous, driven not by angst, but by a thrill for domination. The carnival, the cornfields, The rundown neighborhoods transform from colorful backdrops into arenas where violence grows more intimate and personal with every encounter. The film stops feeling like a teen showdown and starts feeling like something primal, an examination of how social structures crumble when cruelty becomes the town's unspoken rule. Memory made this one feel like a wild ride. A rewatch reveals a slow-motion descent into terror. Fact 4. Monkey Shines, 1988. In popular recollection, Monkey Shines survives as a strange thriller with an evil monkey, a premise so unusual that many treat it as unintentional comedy. But this is a misunderstanding shaped by time. Watching the film again reveals a paralyzing tale of lost autonomy, psychological dependency, and the terror of becoming a spectator in your own life. The protagonist, softened in memory into a sympathetic victim, becomes a haunting study of helplessness. His paralysis is not just physical, it isolates him emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. The world moves without him, people speak over him. His agency dissolves in real time. The monkey, often remembered as a quirky side character, becomes a chilling reflection of the protagonist's darkest impulses. It observes, it reacts. It obeys, but with an unsettling intelligence that mirrors his repressed rage. Their relationship evolves not into partnership, but into entanglement, where affection and fear intertwine until neither can be separated. Even the quietest scenes feel suffocating. Everyday objects, cups, lights, phones turn into symbols of what he can no longer reach. And as the monkey begins acting on feelings he refuses to admit, the film becomes a portrait of a soul losing control of the body, the home, and finally, the mind. Memory turned Monkey Shines absurd. The film remains devastating. Fact 5. The Funhouse, 1981. Many viewers tuck the Funhouse into a mental category labeled Carnival Slasher, recalling flashing lights, painted booths, and a cat and mouse chase within a maze of attractions. But when the film is revisited, the carnival no longer looks like entertainment, it looks like decay wearing makeup. The midway, remembered as energetic, is steeped in exhaustion. Performers shuffle through routines as though crushed by repetition. Laughter drifts through the tents but lacks warmth. The rides and props, once dismissed as colorful genre trappings, now seem grotesque symbols of lives lived on society's fringes, where survival overshadows joy. At the center of it all stands the monster, long misremembered as a gimmick, but rewatching reveals a figure shaped not by innate cruelty, but by humiliation, exploitation, and deep emotional damage. He is terrifying, yes, but also tragic, a creation of an environment that feeds on vulnerability. The teenagers, remembered as typical slasher victims, feel more exposed and unprepared upon rewatch. They wander into a world that has abandoned empathy, where everything, human or not, operates under the weight of its own suffering. The carnival was never fun. It was a warning painted in neon. Fact 6. Tourist Trap, 1979. Over the years, Tourist Trap has been remembered as a bizarre curiosity, strange mannequins, psychic oddities, and a villain whose theatrics felt almost cartoonish. But that memory is a softened version of what the film actually is. A suffocating descent into uncanny horror where every object, every silence, and every smile feels wrong in a way the mind instinctively tries to forget. The mannequins, often recalled as cheap props, become deeply unsettling when revisited. Their frozen faces seem to shift between expressions, their cracked paint catching the light like dried tears. They watch, they listen, they mimic humanity without ever approaching it, and in that uncanny space, they become more frightening than any flesh and blood threat. The setting, a tourist attraction long past its prime, feels like a graveyard of forgotten dreams. Dust thickens the air, light struggles to enter. Time itself seems stalled, as though the world has agreed to leave this corner of reality untouched. The antagonist, once remembered as eccentric, emerges instead as a fractured mind, whose loneliness has curdled into something predatory and unpredictable. On rewatch, the film's surreal tone no longer reads as weird fun. It reads as madness leaking into the physical world. Memory made Tourist Trap quirky. The film is anything but. Fact 7. April Fool's Day, 1986. April Fool's Day is frequently remembered as the gentle slasher, a playful twist on the genre, more prank than terror, but that softened recollection hides the film's true psychological tension. Beneath the laughter and island charm lies a story fueled by suspicion, unease, and the quiet breaking of relationships under pressure. The island setting, often recalled as inviting, becomes isolating the moment the characters arrive. Its beauty feels fragile, almost deceptive, as though the landscape itself is part of the game. The pranks remembered as harmless fun slowly shift into emotional provocations that expose the insecurities and buried tensions within the group. As fear tightens its grip, the tone changes. Conversations become brittle, smiles become armor. The group dynamic unravels in ways that feel disturbingly real, less like a horror plot and more like a social experiment spiraling out of control. And when the final reveal comes, the memory of lightheartedness evaporates, replaced by a quiet ache for trust that cannot be restored. Time made it playful. The truth makes it uneasy. Fact 8. Happy Birthday to Me, 1981. Audiences often recall Happy Birthday to Me for its reputation, elaborate kills, twist-heavy plotting, and a tone some remember as melodramatic to the point of absurdity. But much of that memory dissolves the moment you watch the film again. Beneath the spectacle is a raw and unsettling exploration of identity slipping out of one's grasp. The protagonist, remembered as mysterious and glamorous, reveals deeper fractures upon rewatch. Her lapses in memory, her emotional volatility, her isolation, none of it feels stylized. It feels like someone desperately piecing together a life that refuses to stay still. The film's shifting tone, often mocked as inconsistent, mirrors her psychological instability. It's not the story that's confused, she is. Even the notorious kills, which nostalgia treats as camp classics, lose their humor. Seen now, they carry a sense of tragic inevitability, as though each grotesque death is another shard breaking off her fractured sense of self. The elite school setting, once a backdrop for genre theatrics, transforms into a pressure cooker of expectation, alienation, and emotional distance. Memory turned Happy Birthday to Me into spectacle. A rewatch uncovers a scream buried beneath the birthday candles. Fact 9. The House on Sorority Row, 1982. For many viewers, The House on Sorority Row lingers as a colorful campus slasher parties, pranks, loud music, and that 80 seconds college charm. But that recollection is a shield, a softened rewrite of a film built on tension, guilt, and the slow collapse of trust among friends who are not nearly as carefree as nostalgia insists. The prank at the heart of the story, often remembered as a silly mistake, rewatches as something far more vicious. Its consequences seep into every scene, infecting conversations, glances, and even the air inside the sorority house. What once seemed like archetypal slasher paranoia instead feels like the natural unraveling of people who know, deep down, that they've crossed a line they can't uncross. The house itself changes too. In memory, it's vibrant and full of life. On rewatch, it tightens around the characters like a trap, each hallway echoing with secrets, each room casting new suspicion. And the killer, reduced in memory to a generic silhouette, gains symbolic weight as the embodiment of consequences none of them are prepared to face. What nostalgia paints as fun was always a story about fear festering inside the walls you call home. Fact 10. Curtains, 1983. Many remember Curtains through a single image, a masked figure gliding across a frozen lake. That iconic moment has overshadowed everything else, leaving behind a false memory of a stylish, almost theatrical slasher. But revisiting the full film reveals a far darker undercurrent, one steeped in manipulation, ambition, and the emotional cost of being seen as disposable. The actresses, once recalled as archetypes, expose layers of fear and longing when watched closely. Their interactions carry the weight of competition, expectation, and a desperation that borders on vulnerability. The director, flattened by memory into a demanding artist, reappears as a predator of dreams, shaping and breaking the women around him for the sake of performance. The film's fractured production history lingers in the texture of the story. Scenes feel jagged, unstable, as though the narrative itself is slipping between realities, mirroring the character's inner turmoil. The ice scene, once admired for its visual flair, takes on new meaning as a symbol, a performance demanded under impossible pressure. Memory turned Curtains into a showcase. The film remains a wound left open on purpose. Fact 11. Evil Speak, 1981. In popular memory, Evil Speak is treated like an artifact of early computer-age horror, clunky graphics, occult gimmicks, and over-the-top supernatural payoffs. But returning to it reveals a story built on something far more painful, the corrosion of a young man repeatedly pushed to the edges of his own humanity. The protagonist, remembered as merely awkward or unlucky, emerges as someone carved down by humiliation. His status as an outsider isn't comedic, it's agonizing. Every slight, every insult accumulates until his silence becomes a pressure chamber. When he turns to technology, a glowing screen in a dark room, it is not for power, but for the illusion of being heard. The supernatural element, flattened in memory into cheesy spectacle, becomes chilling when understood as the voice answering his despair. The violence escalates not as chaos, but as inevitability, a monstrous echo of the cruelty that shaped him. Rewatching Evil Speak transforms it from a curiosity into a lament. It's not about satanic imagery. It's about what a mind becomes when no one intervenes. Fact 12. The Pit, 1981. Over time, The Pit has been reduced in collective memory to an oddball creature flick, an eccentric story about a lonely boy and the strange beings lurking in a forest pit. But a new viewing dissolves that playful recollection. The film reveals itself not as a monster tale, but as a portrait of psychological unraveling, where innocence erodes under the weight of neglect and isolation. The boy at the center, softened in memory into a misunderstood outsider, becomes far more unsettling when revisited. His awkwardness is no longer endearing. It is tinged with desperation and a growing detachment from reality. What once seemed like childish mischief now reads like a cry for help that no one hears, and eventually like a warning. Even the creatures, often remembered as silly rubber props, feel different through this lens. They become embodiments of his darkest impulses, the physical manifestation of fantasies that blur the line between play and violence. The forest, once simply a backdrop, becomes an extension of his internal world, a place where boundaries dissolve and consequences vanish into the dark. The Pit was never about monsters. It was about what happens when a child is left alone with his own shadows. Fact 13. The Dorm That Dripped Blood, 1982. For years, The Dorm That Dripped Blood has been remembered as a low-budget curiosity, rough around the edges, dimly lit, and simplistic. But that familiar impression misrepresents the film's true impact. Seen again, it becomes a bleak, chilling descent into isolation, where every shadow feels heavy and every decision feels doomed. The abandoned dormitory, once dismissed as a generic slasher setting, reveals itself as a character in its own right. Its empty rooms echo with a sense of abandonment that predates the murders. The students, remembered as interchangeable victims, carry a quiet desperation that makes each moment feel more fragile than memory suggests. The violence, too, feels different when revisited. Not sensational, not exaggerated, just unnervingly blunt. Each act lands like a reminder that the world within the film is indifferent to survival or justice. And as paranoia spreads, the final revelation doesn't shock because of its twist, it devastates because the film has already taught you that hope is misplaced here. Memory reduces The Dorm That Dripped Blood to a slasher relic. The film itself is an obituary written in cold, grainy images. Fact 14. American Gothic 1987. In memory, American Gothic often transforms into something almost whimsical, a strange island, eccentric characters, and an atmosphere that teeters on the edge of dark humor. But that is a gentler memory than the film deserves. Watching it again strips away every hint of levity and reveals a suffocating portrait of fanaticism, trauma, and emotional decay. The island, once recalled as odd and picturesque, now feels sealed off from reality, a place where time moves according to someone's delusions rather than any natural rhythm. The family at its center, softened into quirky oddballs by nostalgia, becomes unsettling the moment you notice their stillness, their brittle politeness, their desperate clinging to rituals that no longer make sense. What was once perceived as eccentricity is, on rewatch, revealed as deep psychological fracture. Each character behaves as if trapped inside a role they cannot abandon, performing a twisted version of innocence that hides a lifetime of damage. As the veneer cracks, the film shifts from oddball thriller to a disturbing exploration of belief systems so rigid they crush everyone inside them. Memory bends this one into comedy. The truth bends it into tragedy. Fact 15. Sweet 16, 1983. For many viewers, Sweet 16 lingers in memory as a modest, uncomplicated slasher from the early 80 seconds, a film of teenagers, small-town sidewalks, and predictable danger unfolding under neon lights. But that recollection is a softened shell, one the mind builds to avoid confronting the film's true emotional weight. A fresh viewing reveals a world simmering with prejudice, suspicion, and a quiet cruelty far more disturbing than any knife blade. The town itself feels different when revisited. What once seemed familiar now feels oppressive. Every glance carries judgment, every conversation hides an accusation. The violence, remembered as genre standard, is stripped of theatrics. It emerges instead from buried resentment and simmering hostility, making each death feel like a rupture in a community already split along invisible lines. At the center is a girl often misremembered as mysterious, exotic, or simply misunderstood. Revisiting her story reveals something sharper. She becomes the vessel for the town's fears, the mirror that reflects its ugliness. The horror doesn't spring from her presence, but from the way others respond to it, projecting their anxieties, their failures, and their biases onto a single young woman who never asked for any of it. Sweet 16 is not the harmless nostalgia piece memory suggests. It is a study in small-town darkness, one that time has tried and failed to smudge into something lighter. Bonus film, The Sender, 1982. Some recall The Sender as an ethereal psychological oddity, dreamlike, slow, strange, but harmless. Yet, that memory fades quickly upon rewatch, replaced by the film's true nature, an unnerving exploration of how trauma leaks into others when it cannot be contained. The young man at the center, once remembered as mysterious, now appears profoundly vulnerable, his silence weighted, his presence unsettling. His ability to project his nightmares outward is not a supernatural gimmick. It is an emotional overflow, a drowning mind dragging others beneath the surface with him. The hospital, flattened in memory into a sterile backdrop, becomes a maze of flickering lights and anxious whispers. Doctors and patients alike feel unsteady, as though they too are trapped inside someone else's spiraling consciousness. And at the film's dark core stands his mother, misremembered as odd, but in truth terrifying. Her suffocating devotion, her possessiveness, her spiritual rigidity, they bind the boy's trauma to her, creating a cycle of pain neither knows how to escape. The dreams, the visions, the fractures in reality, none of it feels poetic when seen again. It feels invasive, memory softened. The Sender. The film reclaims its teeth. There's a reason these films didn't stay the way you remembered them. The mind rewrites what unsettles it, reshapes it, dulls it, turns sharp edges into something soft enough to hold. But once those memories are restored, once the truth is allowed back in, it becomes impossible to see the illusions again. Tonight, you revisited the versions your memory tried to spare you from. And if these revelations shifted something inside your understanding of horror, the next episode will take you even deeper into the shadows that nostalgia hides. Return to the Night Shriek. Some truths refuse to stay forgotten.